Hello and welcome to the 8th episode of Expert Hub Talks, the vlog where we talk about digitalization and realization of Industry 4.0. My name is Mikaela, and today I have two top shots with me. First of all, it's our business line manager, Norman Fritz. And we also have a very special guest today in form of Mikael Cato, the Chief Digital Officer at Scania. Welcome, Mikael.
Thank you very much.
Maybe we can start there, Mikael, by you just telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do as the CDO at Scania.
Sure. Big thanks for inviting me. So I serve as the Chief Digital Officer at Scania, and on an overarching level, what that is about is that my role is to increase the pace of our digital transformation. Mm-hmm. And I serve the company in like three dimensions doing that. One is the commercial and customer side. One is the industrial side, which I think we will drill a little bit deeper on today. And then we also have the enabling or our support system.
Sounds like a lot of fun, but also a lot of responsibility.
It's super fun. I really enjoy it. I've been with the organization for 4 years now. And since having digital as a focus area in our 2025 strategy, I think that we really try to push it.
So, Mikael, in the previous episodes of Expert Hub Talks, we talked a lot about the realization of Industry 4.0, driven by us at Atlas Copco. But we're, of course, curious then to know more about how Scania, as a global player, is setting the benchmark here. So, what does Industry 4.0 mean for you, and which areas are you focusing on then in this industrialization part?
Yeah. So tying like digitalization, first of all, in the broader sense, then taking it down to a little bit more narrow space like Industry 4.0. That's, I mean, still really, really massive, really, really big. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we do a lot of things in that space together with you guys. So we have a lot of, experimentation on tightenings, digitalizing that. We have a lot of also doing automatic feeders and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And we are trying in our smart factory also to be more data-driven. So a lot of that space ties to what we are doing together. Mm-hmm. But then you also, of course, have a lot of stuff in Industry 4 that relates to construction and to the R&D of our products and services. Yeah. So it's quite a broad space, and it's also has to do with making the priorities. Which areas should you really lead in, and which should you be on par with? Yeah, exactly. So how much of that time are you focusing then on the smart factory and developing the industrialization part? What do you say? That's definitely one of the key priorities. Yeah. So we have as many of you know, we have like a really, really proud history in our production. Mm-hmm. And I think it's referred to as one of the best production systems in the world. Mm-hmm. But to keep on advancing, to keep on improving, that has to do a lot with Industry 4.0 and Industry 4.0 practices. So we are reinvestigating and elaborating our methods on what to take in, and also the process of getting it out in our PRUs.
So it sounds like you have a very solid and well thought through approach. So Norman, reflecting on this, would you say that we're well aligned on supporting Mikael on this journey of digitalization?
I mean, Mikael mentioned the Smart Factory Lab, where we also are a big part of. I mean, we are really happy that we are able to bring our new concepts and also new products to the Smart Factory Lab and try it out there in a real production environment as your partner. And I think you also mentioned the topic of automation, which is a big focus area of our organization as well. Actually, we just founded an own organization down in Darmstadt, Germany, which is pushing automation forward. And we are having the first initiatives running up there where we try to automate current solutions, for example, a wheel nut assembly.
Cool. How important would you say the cooperation between two organizations are in such a journey? Maybe you, Mikael.
I think that a lot of the innovation occurs when teams from different backgrounds and viewpoints meet. Mm-hmm. So I think that collaboration, industry collaboration is key to stay competitive for our companies, but also for kind of like Sweden as a nation. And I think that the collaboration that we have together with you guys, but also together with Combient, which is a large industry network, I think that is super important to stay ahead.
Yeah. Would you agree, Norman?
Same for me. I mean, as I said, we are so proud that we can try our new concepts with our biggest customer in Sweden in real time before we bring it out globally to the market. And we can align these new solutions really to the needs of the customer and not just developing something here in Sigla, which most likely in the end the customer not really want to have like this. So therefore, we have to do it together. Otherwise, it will not really fly.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like we're working close together and really digitalizing the Swedish manufacturing industry, I would say. So, Mikael, in Norman's episode and in a lot of the other previous episodes of Expert Hub Talks, we've talked about the internal challenges of realizing Industry 4.0. I mean, to realize this, it takes a lot of change management because you have to transform people, processes, mindsets. I mean, we of course have our point of view based on our experience from our interaction with the customers. But what's your experience, like perspective of this? Like how is the digital transformation going at Scania?
I think that we are progressing, but as most companies, if we had a magic wand, we'd want the pace to be higher. And when we look at it, what are the challenges of reaching that higher pace? And I think that to us, it comes down to 2 points. When we talk to our executives in our production system, for instance, they really need to understand what good looks like. So they need to have a better view of their wanted position. So how does these technologies really create value for us in the future? And to be able to make the bets on a clearer wanted position. I think that is really, really key because technology develops all the time. So that's one thing. And the other part of it, I would say, is about the capabilities. And when we say capabilities, we refer to like mindset and methods, we refer to technology and platforms, and then competence. And if we are not able to train our managers and our operators to foster thoughts and knowledge on this wanted position, we will never get there. No. So I think it is about those two things, about knowing where we want to head and building the capabilities of reaching there.
Yeah, I mean, competence is key for sure. Norman, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think we have very similar challenges on this journey for digitalization and the realization of Industry 4.0. And I always mention two things on this journey. And one thing is that we as a company need common goals on this. It's not possible that you digitalize department by department. We have to do this in a broader aspect altogether. I mean, therefore, it's a top management task, which has to develop a vision how this company should look like in the future. And therefore, two things, as I said right now. One thing is common goals, and second thing is top management involvement.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, Mikael, this challenge of then increasing the competence and the knowledge, how do you, for example, deal with that internally right now at Scania?
Yeah. Of course, it's a lot about introducing like the proper trainings for the appropriate roles, and that's a basic thing. But we also need to develop new methods to make sure that the competence and the methods find their way out to the business. And we are experimenting on things that has to do with citizen development programs as well. And we do a lot of that together with IT, and that is about building, for instance, the analytics and the automation knowledge within the company where it's supposed to produce value. So that you kind of step out of this supplier and customer relationship within the company. So becoming more DevOps by infusing the methods and capability by the people in the business. That's one example. And I do believe that we need to find even sharper methods and keep developing those methods of being more like DevOps in both the industrial side and the other parts of where we have digitalization ambitions.
Yeah, interesting. And the next topic that I want to really dig into is the sustainability part, because we know at Scania that's like a core part of your strategy. sustainability is something that you really focus on. And we all learned that by realizing Industry 4.0, we can more easily handle the increased product mix that we're seeing in the production. We can more easily deal with the more complex systems and just improve the human interaction in the factories. But how does Industry 4.0 apply and improve sustainability? Like, how is Industry 4.0 connected to sustainability from Scania's point of view, for example?
So I think that, these are two focus areas, but the overlap or the common space between them are really, really big. But we also need to understand that within, if you look at scope 1, 2, and 3 for CO2, for instance, the majority of our footprint is of when our products are in production, in operations. So we have like a big stake there to understand how we use renewable fuels and how we do the transition to electrification in order to handle what's referred to as scope 3. So that's like a super big thing as well, and we work with a lot of like technologies and simulations to maintain and develop our existing like engine base, etc., and also for the future for electrification, where we do stuff together as well. But then we have our factory setup, and that's also an important scope, even though a little bit smaller than the earlier one. And there we have been, I think that we've been doing a lot of stuff together on the electrification side. For instance, for tighteners, we have been doing stuff to understand how to optimize the use of power in our factories, and to get them to a level where we are reach the objectives of the Paris Agreement in our factory setup as well. So we have the Scania targets for sustainability has been ratified. I think that we were the first in the industry for the science-based targets, and we're really proud of that. And that involves both our rolling fleet, of course, and then our internal processes and our setup.
Looking to this part, what you just described, the industrialization and also to building your products, there we play a big role as Atlas Copco also to help you to achieve the targets. And just making some examples here, we really strive to limit the energy consumption. So therefore, we are moving away from having single controllers per tool to multi-controllers. We're even moving away in the future to omit the complete controllers and putting them into the tool, putting them into the cloud, or putting them on the server to just have less hardware in the production. And secondly, there's a huge trend in Scania, which is omitting air tools and going to electric tools, which saves, together with less hardware, a lot of energy in your production. That's definitely one point. And the second point, which also helps a lot of resource savings, is that we are going to a very transparent production. So we can measure all the tightenings, we can report all the results, which makes it easy for Scania to optimize the processes and also avoid stops in the lines, and also later on avoiding field problems, because we have everything controlled before we send it out to the field. And that saves, of course, a lot of resources on personnel and also on material.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anything to add on the sustainability topic?
I think that was 100%.
Yeah, I agree. But Norman, we spoke a lot about the industrialization part, but is there any other topic where digitalization actually transforms how we work?
I think my personal very important topic is how do we actually, as a sales force, communicate and cooperate with our business partners. I think we are a perfect example here. We have been actually contacting each other via LinkedIn. Afterwards, we had digital meetings via Teams to align if we could make such a digital video shooting here together. And we worked on the script also online. And today is the first time we actually meet. And what are we doing here? We are producing digital content. So digitalization is has a huge influence on a supplier like Atlas Copco towards Scania. The whole process which we have, how we engage with customers when it comes to first contacts, when it comes to cooperate and communicate initiatives and products, when it comes to a sales process, when it comes later on to invoicing and aftermarket, everything is digitalized. And the content where you actually physically meet is getting much, much less, but with much, much higher quality.
Yeah.
So that's a huge influence, I would say, on a customer center where we are all in here.
Yeah, for sure. And that helps also with the sustainability part, that it saves a lot of energy consumption and stuff where you don't have to travel to see one another. But do you think that will also affect the way that we will work together and interact with Scania on a daily basis if there are any issues in the production?
Of course, I mean, there's a big change. I mean, first one example again, I mean, Scania is my biggest account. I have been this year one time at Scania, but I met them online 100 times. So it's really changed here. And when it comes to more than sales or more than cooperation between the management, when it, for example, comes to service, when it comes to installations, then also this is changing a lot. For example, we can now connect and log in to our systems at Scania remotely. We can look if something is not working, make an installation remotely. We will not always have to come, so we can be much faster, but that's today. In the future, there will be a lot of more changes. Just look at the possibilities technical-wise. I mean, we have Google Glasses. We could actually be there in real time, looking together with you on a current problem you have in a station and help you with our assembly know-how to solve it. So there's so many more things to come when it comes to the use of the digital tools in the future.
Yeah. How about digital twins?
That's of course the last topic which I should never forget is of course a big part of our cooperation is to build a line together. And currently we have pilot lines coming up, we have pilot stations, but I think our common target is to omit the steps. We want to do this all together digitally, building the lines, trying the lines out all digitally, and we only want to build a line when we actually really want to produce something. And therefore we have a project in Atlas Copco, but I think Scania as well, which is called Digital Twins, where we actually are able to digitalize all our products and give them as models to Scania, so that Scania actually in their simulations can simulate the line in a real detailed phase.
Yeah. So Mikael, do you see the same from your perspective, that you'll move into more of digital twins and that interaction with your suppliers will become more digitalized?
Yeah, I think that's a general direction. Commenting on the first part as well, we see the same development with our customers. So when we're stepping out of the pandemic and when the order volumes increased, we basically have larger order volumes to sub 50% of the physical or face-to-face customer interaction. And that is a learning for the company, and we are developing the vision on how we do that in a good way, and we have set some really, really nice and firm targets for that for the future. Coming back to simulations and basically collaboration on data, I mean, Atlas Copco is a great partner for us, and we want to continue working, but we also collaborate with other partners, and there is where we have the innovation, and we strive for having open and transparent use of data, so we can combine data and create like the top simulations and the top digital twins in order to optimize our future and our productivity. And I kind of challenge you guys on that area, because we need to be able to work in the ecosystems of all partners to optimize this, because this will be an important question of the future. It's not about locking a customer in today in their system, in their cloud, just using their data, because then we will reach one level of productivity increases. We need to combine that with multiple sources to gain a higher progress or a higher possibility. And I think that's an area where we can do more. And the future will be about simulations and digital twins in very many areas. So super interesting to touch on that.
Yeah. Norman, any comments on that? Or?
Now we see the same. I mean, we are really want to cooperate with Scania on this, have a very open relationship with you in the industry, because I think we are all together in this topic. I mean, nobody can solve this on their own. It's not the time here to build your own ecosystem. It's something we have to build together. And I mean, our target is not to sell some tools to you. Our target is that we all together build the perfect truck. And we are always very proud that we can help Scania to build trucks.
And buses.
And buses,
engines,
of
and
course.
power solutions. And services.
And services.
Well, it's an interesting point because from my understanding, a lot of customers usually see their data as something classified, that it's confidential almost. But do you have a different opinion on that, or?
So I think that there's different types of data. Of course, I mean, our customer data, that's crucial to us. And when we work with partners to share that data, that needs to be in agreement with our customer, right? And in this case, we are your customer. But the end game here is to find like improvements in our like quality and productivity. And since we have relations with many suppliers, to be able to take that to the next level, we need to be able to share and work together with data. I think that is, I mean, we have a lot of experts in this area, and we could drill deeper on that specifically. But to my knowledge, the possibility we have to combine different simulations in order to create larger scope of digital twins, that is super important.
Yeah, and we are definitely in for this. I mean, we see Scania as our absolutely preferred partner, where we can share informations with, and there is no real limit for this. I mean, we really want to be in there with you.
Cool. Any last thoughts or reflections on Industry 4.0 and transforming into the future?
Again, big thanks for inviting me, and I think that this has been a great talk, and a lot of sharing of perspectives and ideas, and looking forward to the future.
Sure.
Same for me. I'm always very proud to be invited to your blogs, and I'm really happy that we could make you come to our blog, and also that we have a future in working together on these topics. I mean, I'm very keen on Industry 4.0, because I think that's the way how the Swedish industry will set the benchmark. I mean, if we want to survive, we have to be first on these topics, from my point of view.
Yeah, I think I could press you guys a little bit more on some more questions, but I'm gonna respect the digital audience and the attention span here. So thank you guys for joining, and thank you for watching.